Welcome to today's episode of SRG Insights, where we answer your questions about sales, sales management, and sales training. And today's question is?
Renan DeBarros asks, how do you deal with office conflicts?
So that is really a wonderful question, because when you think about office conflict, that's typically driven by, either a negative attitude or maybe poor motivation. And most managers over time become proficient at things like managing sales performance. So what are the key results they're looking for? What are the underlying behaviors, or sales coaching, which really gets to focusing on the effectiveness of the salesperson's use of selling skills or knowledge. But when you get to attitude or motivation, you actually need an additional skill called performance counseling. And this is one of the topics we cover in our new book, The High Impact Sales Manager. So if you have office conflict, it's likely driven by, again, poor attitude or a lack of motivation. And you want to think about performance counseling as one of the tools you'll use to address that type of situation. So some of the symptoms you'll see when you might need performance counseling is if you're seeing excessive complaining by one of your members of your sales team, or you're seeing a salesperson maybe making negative comments about your company or about you or about another employee, and that would certainly be a driver of conflict. And then think about, okay, this is really going to require a immediate attention and a process to deal with that. But before we get into the process, what I'd like to cover is just some key guidelines you should have in mind. So the first kind of overarching guideline is really think about what is the underlying behavior that you're seeing. And there are certain behaviors where you're absolutely going to want to get human resources working with you early on in the process and consult with them first. Some examples might be a violation of company policy, anything involving substance abuse or sexual harassment. Those are all kind of red flags where you absolutely want to get a human resources professional involved early. But if it's something more like coming late to the office, or maybe a negative comment that someone made in the in the break room, those are things you could probably deal with just a little bit of guidelines from human resources. So with that, here are some specific guidelines you should keep in mind whenever it gets to a performance counseling session. Focus counseling on the behaviors. So you really want to focus on the key behaviors that you're seeing. Avoid attacking or labeling the person that you're speaking with in a negative way. Again, you're there to deal with the behavior, not necessarily to in any way attack the person you're working with. You want to focus on plans for improvement. You want to stay away from excuses or blame. You want to make sure that the guidelines that you put in place for improvement are practical, and you want to demonstrate that you care about the success of that individual and your sales team. So here's a 7-step process you should follow when it gets to performance counseling. Step 1, open the session in a positive and serious way. You want to make sure that the person understands that this is important. It can often be awkward, so you may want to point to prior performance where they were doing really well if you can, because what that does is it sets the tone that they're capable of having great performance. And then you want to get to the specific behavior at hand. Step 2, after you've opened the session, wait for a response. If you've addressed something that you've seen, maybe it's a person coming late to work, maybe it's a person saying something negative about another employee, after you've brought that to their attention, going back to step 1, you need to wait for their response. And you may want to pause for a while. Initially, they may become defensive. They may deny it. Again, you want to be very specific. Tell them exactly what you've seen and why and how that impacts performance. Step 3, seek and or offer a solution. So the best solution would be one that the employee that you're meeting with can actually offer, saying, so what do you think you can do to improve the situation? Obviously, if you have their buy-in, a commitment not to start to come on time, or it's a commitment not to say something negative about another employee, then you've got them invested in the solution. If for any reason you're not pleased with what they're suggesting, then offer your own solution, and at that point you may want to be very directive. So here's what I'd like to see you do going forward. Step 4, get their commitment to the proposed solution. It's really important that they're committed to the solution. You may have to be very direct, say, based on what we've discussed, is this something you can agree to? If they say yes, you want to take that at face value. You want to be very positive. If for any reason they say no, you don't want to end the discussion on negative bent. You should politely wrap up and say, you know what, I'd like to think about that and I'll get back to you. So again, if they say yes, you're on the right track. If they say no, you want to wrap up that session. At that point, you definitely want to consult with human resources. Step 5, establish a method of follow-up. So once you've had that conversation, you have an agreed to plan, say, you know what, I'd like to get back together just in about 2 or 3 weeks, or depending on what the behavior was, some reasonable period of time, and say, has there really been improvement? If there's been general improvement, you certainly want to note that. You want to share with them why you appreciate that and how that's having a positive impact on morale. If it's not as good as what you've seen, but it's better than it was, you probably still want to acknowledge the improvement, but tell them that there's still work to do. Step 6, you want to close the session in a positive manner. Whether that's your initial meeting or a follow-up meeting, you want to stay positive. This is someone that you've decided you want to keep on your team, and therefore you want to keep the conversation positive. Again, your goal is to address the underlying behavior, whether that's an employee conflict or some other kind of attitude or motivation issue, and you want to set the tone that you have confidence in that person's ability to improve. Step 7, you want to document the performance counseling conversation. And that will vary from company to company. So whenever you're going to have some kind of performance counseling conversation, it's best to check in with human resources first, find out what kind of documentation, if any, that they would like. And the reason that documentation is really important is it may become very important if you decide you want to maybe reassign that employee to a different role, or you want to put them on a corrective action plan, or potentially even terminate employee. So again, that's likely to be company specific, but again, it's important that you just consult with your HR department. So again, here are the 7 steps you should follow as it relates to performance counseling in order to address underlying behaviors driven by poor attitude or motivation. And they are: step 1, open the session in a positive and serious way. Step 2, after you've opened the session, wait for a response. Step 3, seek and or offer a solution. Step 4, gain commitment to the proposed solution. Again, if you can't gain commitment to the solution, you probably want to wrap up and come back after you've consulted with HR. Establish a method of follow-up, so set a date and time for your next meeting. Close every session in a positive manner, and document your performance counseling session based on the guidelines from your human resources department. By following these steps, you'll have added a new skill to your sales management arsenal. So in addition to being a great coach and managing performance, you now have some background on performance counseling. And again, all of these topics are covered and more in our new book, The High Impact Sales Manager.